Hello, everybody. If it's Wednesday, it's Warhammer, and that must mean it's time for another episode of Warhammer Weekly. Joining me, as always, from a remote location deep in the woods, it's my co-host Tom. What's up, buddy?
Hello, friends.
He literally is somewhere deep in the woods in an unknown, unmarked location. Don't try to find him; you will not succeed. Also joining us this week, back on the show, couldn't be happier to have him, Mr. Paul Wagner. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
It is so good to have you back on. Paul, famous for many, many, many things. First and foremost, being, of course, the owner of the creepiest army in all of Warhammer and the largest collection of spiders.
The best spider army.
Yeah, the best. Yes, absolutely. So we're happy to have you on, Paul, because you are not just a collector of all things spidery. You're also a fantastic narrative gamer and narrative event organizer, as a matter of fact. We might call that a Neo. And
True. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And before the sad news of Adepticon being canceled earlier this year, you had some pretty big stuff going on with a whole narrative game that was going to be going there.
That's correct. It was called the Gibbering Dome, and we had a lot of build up to it. 2 Plus Stuff did a video on the lore, which was absolutely amazing. We were coordinating to do some absolutely awesome coverage of the event, and unfortunately, with everything that did happen, that did fall through. But hopefully next year we will come back just as strong and get that momentum back and move this forward. So really excited for it.
That's right. We're going to talk about that and all things narrative tonight. So that's what we'll get into. But first, of course, the no news. All right, Tom.
Hey. We have a rumor engine.
We do. Here's my formal prediction as I already responded on Twitter. This is the official release of my Whirlwind's Edge army. They liked it so much when they read the article, they were like, "No, this is our next city. This is going to be the city that pushes the human technology." And you know, we've got a lot of pipes. Clearly, there's lots of there's some piping action, but they're rusty. That's how I like my pipes. Rusty
Totally checks
and
out.
rusty. Yep. So this is just, I look forward to the inevitable official release of Whirlwind's Edge as the next city of Sigmar. I think it's just going to be part of Cities 2, obviously.
Yeah.
Checks out.
There you
Paul, did you see it?
I did see it. I don't know. It kind of looks a little Skaven to me. I would love to see some Rats and Hats type Skaven City stuff, but
man.
it has been a while since we've seen some Skaven. And I was just thinking last week that is one of those properties that is absolutely GW. They're the first ones who really kind of push that aesthetic, and it's something we really haven't seen. And having all the main armies having battle tomes now, there is some really fruitful ground for designers to really go crazy with those ideas. So.
I totally agree. Like, Skaven need an expansion at some point in the next 2 years. I don't want to see a redo of the book. I think that original book is fine. Right? I really would much prefer to see either a new clan introduced or build out Clan Scryer or build out Clan Eshin and get a bunch of new models for that. Because admittedly, the last time that we got, any kind of model support for Skaven, it was back in the end times with a few kits we got back there, right? That came out in time with that. Not that that's bad. There are other armies.
You did get the Bombardier. You did get the Skaven Bombardier in.
You know what? You got me.
Yeah, you got a new model. That's a new
got
model.
one.
I never count those heroes. I'm sorry.
And you got the Underworld Warband. I mean, come on.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's like 6 new.
Those were amazing.
Those
that
are
is the
amazing.
totality of my that is the totality of my Shadespire Warband is what you just named.
Yeah.
Plus Stormfiends.
And you got the Death
good
Sleeper
plastics.
or the Death Runner in Warhammer Quest. I mean,
Oh, never mind. You know
this?
what? I take it back. Skaven releases top to bottom. That's all it's been the past 6 years. How did I miss all these
Skaven are
critical
done.
releases? Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Oh,
man. We're good. You got me.
No, I agree. Especially from a narrative perspective, the Eshin are really have a lot to give to push narrative forward and to really create some interesting stories instead of being a warfare-based clan, they really are about subterfuge and spying and assassination.
Objectives. They're about objectives.
Exactly, and that could add some really interesting momentum as far as the lore is moving forward, for sure.
Agreed. Every time something critically important happens, the Skaven are there. Like we're always there in the background. I picture some important character in the Mortal Realms having a realization like the end of a mystery where the detective's like, wait a minute, and then they're like, choo, 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 when they have all the flashbacks to the scenes, and you look to like the left of the camera, and there's always like a little rat there, where there's one, a little Skaven there reading a newspaper. He was over like having an ice cream cone in a different scene, Yeah,
it's as a warrior priest, like of Sigmar.
Could be. They could be everywhere. Yes. I would. That would be. I mean, that's a dream release. It's never gonna happen. But yes, I do want to see the reformed Skaven.
Rats, instead of rats and hats, it's rats reforged.
Rats reforged. Yeah, exactly. The Skaven of Sigmar. That's a personal wish, but I can make. Probably will never happen, but that's okay. I can dream, and I can make it happen myself if needs be. Anyway, yeah, it's probably some chaosy 40K thing, but okay.
Yeah, sure.
That's fine. The Lumineth are dropping this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean, sort of, yes.
Yeah, like, let's be honest, actually. One box with 3 kits are dropping this weekend, and then we'll probably wait another 3 months until we see the rest.
Hey, there are tokens, there are rulers, there's a battle tome.
Yeah.
Like,
all kinds of stuff.
With them pushing it back that far, like, I will probably end up having to, like, I'll keep a battle tome in my tokens and dice and just resell everything else. Because the market is just going to be hot.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be such a demand for those models that, like, it's going to be really hard to just start hobbying on them. Because, like, it's not like the rest of the army's here anyways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll keep my book and my dice.
I have to say, it's a pretty bold move for GW to release such an important release so quickly after they reopened. I know board game companies and other companies have had some issues with shipping, so I'm actually pretty impressed they were able to get their issues straightened out as fast as they were. I didn't anticipate this box coming out for another couple weeks because of all the horror stories I've heard from all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point we're thinking it's probably August or September. They said later in the year. That to me that means something like that. And they've obviously they're gonna roll into the 9th ed 40K thing, right? So and that's fine. Like I get it. You got to go where your bread's buttered, but then this will be out there. Which here's the thing, what this will hopefully inspire is people to actually get this part of their army painted. Because I do think that the 3 units that come in that box, at least 2 of them, mainly the numerous ones, will end up in most armies. As much as I love the Light of Itharian, I don't think he's going to show up too often in a lot of forces, which is a shame.
There's just going to be this market glut. Like, I joke around about those units, like reselling them. The reality is that like the Wardens, for sure. The Cab, the Dawn Riders, maybe. Yeah. And then everybody's going to have Eltharians that they just can't get rid of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but that's going to be the model that's submitted to every painting competition from here, there, and everywhere. Because it's a gorgeous model that you're not going to put on the tabletop usually, unless you don't put,
I don't know.
Army.
I love him. Let me say that. Like, I love that model. I think, but I agree. I think that there's like... So that, we'll talk about the other half of what happened is all of the models or all of the book basically leaked this week.
Yes.
And so like that's out in the wild now. And so, we'll obviously do a Lumineth show in the next couple of weeks. So we're not going to do that now. But what I will say is that the army from a design standpoint is designed really interestingly. And I saw somebody on Twitter today, mention, or there's a discussion about Teclis being a trap, and
I disagree.
I may agree with that. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if he can pull. I don't know if he's worth his 660. That's my problem.
I think he is. He is very much worth his 660. You are out of your stinking mind. We'll have that discussion in a couple weeks. I don't think he's essential. I think you can make a list without him. But he is absolutely worth 660 of 660 points. Yeah, he super is. Okay.
He's good. He's good. He's good. And we'll talk about it. But yeah, I will say this just as an aside. Dawn Riders are my pick. I love them ponies. Like we'll talk about this, but I think that there's a lot of gas in Dawn Riders, even if they're not going to be your primary like spam unit. I think the utility, like I think that a lot of people are going to overlook that unit, and I think that's a mistake.
Well, time will tell.
Yep.
All right. So yes, that we'll have to wait a couple months. I will tell you what I hope happens.
Yep.
Paul, I think you're going to support this. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. The rest of the Lumineth is kind of a big release, right? There's like a lot of kits to that. They want to make sure that's got its own runway and build up and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is another army waiting in the wings it's pretty simple. It's one kit, one book. That's it.
As far as we can tell, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking they slide them Gargants.
Mm-hmm.
They slide them Sons of Behemoth right up in front of the rest of the Lumineth. Like, why not? Just drop it. That's an easy off weekend drop, right? You do like 2-3 weeks of 40K. You need 1 week of something different to break it up. You drop the Sons of Behemoth and that Daughters of Cain warband or whatever, and boom.
Yeah.
There's your week. You're good to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've got Pariah coming out next weekend.
Yep.
You can't really expect them to drop 9th edition the next weekend, do you think? Is that what they're saying? Or I agree that there has to be some buffer between, this monumental story wrap up in the 40K and 9th edition dropping.
Right. It feels like that has to be a larger, what do I want to say, pre-release, pre-order, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I just feel like there's some spots in there, and I think that's where we'll slide in like them Daughters. I think that's where we'll slide in the Sons of Behemoth. And then eventually they'll get the best of the big elf release. This is just the reason I think this has been a calculated move on Games Workshop's part to force the elf players to actually paint their really pretty like highly detailed models as nicely as they can. Like, we're gonna give them months where all they can focus on is horsies and spearmen, the theoretical sort of backbone of the army, right?
Ponies and pokers.
Ponies, that's right. Ponies and pokers. So you get those looking real sassy, right? And then we'll give you the rest of the army. This is the you can't have your dessert. You got to finish your peas and your carrots first. Then we'll give you the rest. Yeah.
Then we'll give you the awesome hats.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can go to town.
Yep. So several people are saying the 9th pre-order will go on pre-order on the 11th, which makes sense to me. I think the big question in my mind right now is, we look at the calendar.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the last little news item. This will tie into that. When we look today, right now, it is currently the 24th of June.
Correct.
This Saturday is the 27th.
That's right.
Which would put us, obviously, if they announce something for pre-order this weekend, that would mean it would be coming out on Independence Day, the 4th of July, also known as the 5-year anniversary of AOS. I can't believe that they wouldn't know. Like, to me, if they're going to do the 40K, I'm sorry, everybody, by the way. Let me just get this out of the way real quick. I was super sick right after the show that last week. Like, on Thursday, I got crushed bad enough that I had to go in for, like, a COVID test or whatever. I'm fine. It was okay. But
you had COVID, didn't you?
No, I did not. That's what I'm saying. Like, literally, I went and got a test, and it was negative. But I did not move out of bed for most of the weekend, and I'm still recovering. So I apologize, everybody, if I like cough or if I lose my voice at some point. Anyway, so I can't believe they wouldn't know or wouldn't want to celebrate this really tremendous milestone.
Oh, agreed.
Right.
Ben Johnson knows. Ben Johnson,
they know.
Come on.
They
know.
Yeah.
We know. They know. Everybody knows. So, like, I really hope we see something special for that 4th of July
How
release
about
weekend.
even like a GHB?
Sure, that could be when the GHB comes out. Sure, it could be the celebration.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a reasonably good thing, and they could do a bunch of just like online content and events and stuff celebrating it. Yeah, sure, that'd be
Yeah,
fine.
and then like and have like a milestone model, like they release Hamilcar, Stormcaster or something.
A George Washington inspired Stormcast. There we go.
There you go. That's
I'm
right.
calling it right now.
I mean, I'm just gonna go out there and say that the 4th of July probably not big on the British calendar.
No,
No,
I doubt it.
Yeah, so probably not a George Washington. Just a thought. Just gonna throw that one out there.
I think they're being sore
we might
losers.
get like a Chaos Warrior George Washington.
Sure.
Maybe there'd be a tea party. Maybe a tea party. Would that be
exactly.
a good thing?
There you go.
That's too on the nose.
But at any rate, I think that I am interested to see what they're going to announce this Sunday and what it's going to herald for the 5th anniversary. But regardless of any of that, we'll be doing our 5th anniversary of AOS show next week, and that we will be kicking off a whole like 5 days of content. So Aaron Bostaine, who is the Neo who runs the narrative event at Nova, has reached out to all the content creators and is putting together a big schedule and a bunch of 5th anniversary celebration stuff. So we'll have a whole schedule for you. We'll kick it off next week. We'll talk about all the shows. You can look at exactly what Aaron just posted, the hashtag 5 years AOS. So it's going to be really cool stuff from a lot of different content creators, starting from basically Wednesday through the weekend next week through the actual 5th anniversary. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun stuff. I'm looking forward to it. Regardless of whether or not we get a cool release, we'll make it cool.
So did you say that was the last news item?
Basically, yes.
Can I take responsibility but sneak in one more small little news item?
Of course you can.
Sure.
So we just got the Warhammer Community Podcast, right?
You did.
And there's episode 3 came out on Monday with Jonathan Hartman, the Emmy Award winner composer. And if you listen to that podcast, he talks about writing music for 40K, but he also talks about writing music for Age of Sigmar. And he talks about how he doesn't write music until after the rough cuts are done.
Nice.
So he's only doing animation. And if you read between the lines, if he's working on music for Age of Sigmar, we're getting Age of Sigmar animation.
That's awesome.
And I am pumped. I am pumped. I'm going to be so there's all kinds of speculation as to what that could be in my head, but that would just be absolutely amazing. I mean, we could do Warhammer Adventures, we could do Callus and Toll, we could there are so many things that we could just go to town with.
Yeah, I mean, when you scroll down to the individual level, I think in both 40K or the Mortal Realms, there's just an unlimited number of stories you can tell. I mean, I remember, Tom, you and I, we ripped off the top of our head like 5 different animated series we would absolutely love to see. Yeah. And, there's just so many good options out there. So, they had been they had sort of been like, well, if this 40K stuff works, we certainly want to do some AOS too. A wink, wink, they were very much on the nose about it. So I think that's wonderful. I can't wait.
Yeah. And if you haven't listened to the podcast, also a wonderful listen for a dedicated hobbyist whose life has taken a completely different turn and a completely different discipline, and yet still comes back to Warhammer. So that was a fun listen for me as well.
Nice. Do you want to just transition that to be your pick of the week? Because that's a good transition from news into pick of the week.
That's what I was kind of thinking would work well, is if I did that, because it's awesome. If you don't know, I actually did go to college for music. I have a ton of background in doing vocal work, arrangement, a little bit of composing and stuff like that. And it was amazing to listen to someone who, like I said, is in a completely different discipline, obviously is doing amazing in that discipline. You don't win an Emmy by being bad at your job.
Right, sure.
Right. And the way he talks about it, I mean, honestly, Vince, this transitions into another thing, reminds me a lot of how you guys talk on the podcast on design.
Sure.
Because he really is breaking down what you're trying to feel and how you are trying to create emotion. And it's just a really interesting way of dissecting 40K and Age of Sigmar and putting it into a different language. And there was a really interesting point where he talks about how in the Warhammer stores, Games Workshop stores, we always used to listen to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack and all that kind of stuff for forever. And he was really hoping that, this Angels of Blood, Angels of Death soundtrack, etc., will be something that plays in Warhammer stores someday, right? Yeah, that'll be the thing when you walk in the door. And then they transition to him talking about cutting up Titanicus Knights and putting on Daemonette Slanesh claws because it's just so fun, and how this is really what he does to like relieve his stress. So it was an awesome, really inspirational podcast. So I'd highly recommend you listen to it. So
nice.
For sure.
Awesome. Very good. Tommy, what do you got for pick of the week?
Honest Wargamer had a long deep dive on Lumineth, and I would encourage you to check it out. It was a engaging listen. I'll say that.
This is the Monday show that you're talking about when they went.
Yeah, it was the Monday show. Yeah, you want to talk about that?
No, I mean, well, sure. It was good. They go through the Lumineth Realm Lords pretty nicely, and just kind of really break down the various sort of units and stuff like that. Nothing too controversial in that part. I thought that one was fine. That show was fine. And I have no issue with that at all. I'll call Rob out for something later. For my pick of the week,
I was just teeing it up for you, just in case.
I understand. I appreciate it. I'll wait till we get to our subject. I want to tee up the latest battle report from Doom and Darkness. It was his Ogre Maw Tribes versus Flesh Eater Courts, and it was great. It was great to watch. I hate Flesh Eater Courts. I hate that army. I hate playing against that army. I like watching that army get crushed. I won't spoil anything. I did like this battle report. You can infer what you want from that. It was a good battle report.
So
and so, at any rate, I'll link that down below. It was a solid one. So, okay. Let's talk about some hobby time, guys. I already know Tom is going to have nothing for this because he's out in the deep heart of the woods. But Paul, from what we were talking about before the show, I think you're going to be able to carry the weight for him here.
Yeah.
What have you been working on?
It was my birthday at the beginning of the month, and then Father's Day last weekend. And I have I basically had an all Warhammer birthday / Father's Day month. So I was able to get an Ironclad for my birthday, which was amazing. And Archaon as well from the other side of the family.
Feels like those could be kit bashed together in a nice way.
Yeah, but I also ended up getting the Triarch Stalker for 40K for Father's Day. And that's going to be my kit bash of choice at that Ironclad to get that going with my Grotback Scuttlers and get some legs on it. See what I can do with that. Then I also got the Cipher Lords for my wife, so I put those together. Again, another gorgeous kit. And then I ended up picking up and start collecting Death Rattle with the Mortarch and the skeletons because my neighbor's son is getting into Warcry. He's playing against my son, so I, of course, had to pick up the whole start collecting because it's a better value than just picking up the skeletons alone. That's how it works.
That's, obviously.
Exactly. So I've been also finished up this week painting my Alrica Zenth model from the Silver Shard. So that is a Scourge Privateer female captain that I converted out of a Blood Bowl Dark Elf female figure with a Corsair cape, Corsair arms, then a Witch Elf head, and a Dark Eldar ponytail.
Nice.
That I painted up to try and match the artwork a bit. So I had a lot of fun getting that finished. So a lot of plastic that I have to work through, and got some projects finished too, which was nice.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Paul is, as I hope you know, if you follow Paul on Twitter, you already know that he's the master of bits, and that Paul usually does a bit of the day, challenge you to guess what kit a bit is from, because Paul's bits collection is truly beyond reason. Yes, that's good, Tom. Got anything crunchier you could eat live on the show? Maybe. There you go.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of generosity that's allowed me to collect those bits. Kenny Lowell has donated a ton to me, as well as multiple other people. So it's one of the things that I really enjoy is just looking through all those little plastic pieces and imagining what they could be.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
As someone who's just put the finishing touches, sans the display board, on a completely kit-bashed army, I understand completely.
Yeah.
Tom, have you worked on anything hobby-related in the last week? Do you have anything you want to share with us, or have you just been doing, or have you just been enjoying some vacation time with your family?
No. So like I arranged my models.
Okay. It's kind of something.
I repaired a bunch of stuff that was broken.
Okay, that's real.
That's real. And I narrowed down lists down to as I'm looking at NashCon in 2 months. And I gathered the things that need to be painted for that.
Okay.
So like those are hobby related.
Those are things. You did things.
Those are things. And then I wrote D&D campaign stuff for the marathon that's swiftly approaching.
Swiftly approaching, my friend.
No, I mean, not a lot. Let's I'm not gonna lie. I haven't written a lot, but I have wrote some.
So I have a question for you, Tom, and this might be a loaded question, but is arranging models open play?
I mean, maybe.
Because I'm firmly of the belief that arranging models to look pretty on your own terrain, etc., just for the satisfaction of doing it, is absolutely open play.
I mean, that would kind of check out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like, but I don't want to throw shade at open play for those that like see it as like a very real way of engagement. Like,
but I think it's both, though, right?
It's playing with your toys, although there's no dice being rolled.
Well, it's single player open play.
Sure.
Right.
I mean,
quarantine open play.
Yeah.
There you go.
There
you go.
Yeah.
All right. For myself, obviously, I finished up those two last models I had.
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
And I ordered some Lumineth. That happened.
Sure.
That counts. That counts. Whoever says so.
Hey! I also ordered the endless spells for Slaves to Darkness too.
Oh wow!
So
you're doing some hobbying via purchase? Yeah, sure. That counts.
Sure. Yeah.
For myself, I finished up those last two units for my Whirlwind's Edge army, and those are now in the case. Shared those out. I was originally going to kind of stop there, but I still had these. But then I was feeling like utter crap and could barely, like, I just couldn't. The next part, which is working on the display board, is like a very major thing that's going to require a lot of work. And I have to, like, leave the house and go to stores and buy things. And I just wasn't...
Interact with people?
Yeah, I just wasn't in that place. Like, moving was sort of a high bar challenge. So instead, I got out this last unit that I had left kind of converted but hadn't finished in my 3 Endrin Riggers for my Whirlwind's Edge army, which is the new, like, little jumpy guys, but they have happy little, you know, Empire heads, and some of them have Empire pistols, and they've got little, like, this is the guy with the rifle, so he's got the special gun. Another dude over here, they've got, you know, pistols and little chain swords. And they're little, I'm using like the old Empire Pistolier Outrider heads. So, that kind of thing. So, those guys are almost done.
I would be remiss if I did not say how gorgeous those models are, Vince. Those are absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thanks, man. They came out really well. I hate everything about these little fiddly guys from the new kit. I have learned that I despise them. They drive me crazy. Because the Adeptus Mechanicus stuff is so small and fiddly and packed with, like, little detail
Yeah.
Okay, that they are honestly annoying to paint. So, but the bright side is I'm almost done with them. So they just have a tiny bit more work of cleanup to do. And then that will be the last unit. And then hopefully by this weekend I'm good enough that can start work on the display board. And that's going to be a project in and of itself. So we'll see.
Fair.
Awesome. I'm excited about it. It'll be a big thing. And the bright side is I'll get something playable out of it too. You'll see. All right. So, with that, gentlemen, why don't we turn and talk about some narrative? There's a lot to unpack here. There's so much. But at a high level, I want to start by calling out Rob. So, Rob, on one of his shows, I don't remember what show this was. This is recent. He said something to the effect of, and I'll paraphrase here, that basically all gaming is narrative gaming, because if you make a list, you're playing narratively, since, you know, everything that's in the book is part of that army, and you're playing with them, you're using the troops of that army, that's being narrative. And so people who say I am a narrative gamer are just wanting an excuse to be bad or something like that. That is sort of the story he gave. Now, Rob had a whole story around it. He used a purposefully incendiary comment to make a point about sort of the nature of narrative gaming and where it matches with competitive, and that they're really not that different. And his point was nice and soft in the end. But I'm still going to call him out and say, that's it, Rob, them's fighting words. Okay, so, by the way, I'll be on Rob's show tomorrow. So,
so he's sleeping right now, so don't watch the show before he comes up.
Right, yeah, exactly. Rob, I will get Doug to punch you. That's what will happen, okay? Get the real narrative gamer. Okay, so I want to just start. How do you think of narrative gaming as a broad umbrella term? So, Paul, I want to have you go first.
All right. So, narrative gaming is really telling a story, right? So, to Rob's point of if you're picking models from an army book, you are therefore being narrative, right? That's not narrative gaming because you haven't hit the gaming point yet, right? You can definitely set up the army to have a narrative focus.
That's narrative framing.
Yeah, it's a narrative framing. Like, it's basically the world building that you have done before you show up at the table, right? It is the character that you have defined for the personality that you have defined for the character that you are playing, right? But narrative gaming is not just about making sure the models look like they belong in the same army, right? Narrative gaming is truly about telling a story, and not only telling a story, but telling a story with your opponent, right? It's not just you sitting there saying, this is what I'm going to tell, and this is how it's going to happen, and you're going to sit there and take it, right? Narrative gaming should really be about the relationship of you and the other player and how this story works out, right?
Right.
If you actually talk about how authors write books, if you actually talk about how composers write music, they don't sit down and write out the entire symphony, the entire book, from one point to the end. Everything works out exactly perfectly fine, and everybody knew what was going to happen all along, and therefore it's great because I'm really smart and this is how it works, right? That's not how it works. What happens is, you know, when an author starts to write a book, there's what's called pantsing, right? Or there's plotting. So you either plot out what's going to happen, right? And so match play tends to be more of plotting. I'm going to do this thing, so in 3 turns, this unit will be over here and able to take this objective, and then this unit over here is going to be over here in 2 turns and hopefully be able to take out that unit that's holding this objective, right? So narrative gaming is far more about pantsing than about plotting, but it doesn't mean that narrative gaming can't be about plotting. What it means is that narrative gaming encompasses the entire spectrum. But what it really asks of you is to ask not, why am I using this unit because it's efficient for the points? why am I using this unit? Because this is a unit that I want to use because I want to tell a story with what's going on. Either it's your general or perhaps your battle line units, or this one cool conversion that you did. It's asking you to invest some of yourself into the army in order to figure out what's going to happen. And then you and your opponent are together engaging in relating that story.
Yep.
And, for me in particular, I know this is not a general statement, but for me in particular, it's about giving value and giving honesty to that interaction by allowing that result, whatever that is, to define what's going to happen moving forwards, right? And what that is for me, that allows the other player on the other side of the table to help me to determine what story my army is going to take next, and even what models I might buy for that army, right? I got an ironclad for my birthday, but I wouldn't allow myself to buy an ironclad until I took down an ironclad in battle in Age of Sigmar, because my army is Grots, so they can only salvage. And if I can't take down an ironclad, then how can I narratively justify including an ironclad in my force?
Sure.
Right? There's a quick little summary for me.
Yep. No, that's good. I think that there's an element here. Like, I think it's important to say that narrative gaming does represent this pretty broad spectrum of ways to engage with the hobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can have somebody who is a narrative gamer because they're using basically all the trappings of match play. And I've seen plenty of people at the tournaments that I like to go to, they're like this, where they show up. I mean, Paul, who did the ongoing storyboard at, do you remember what I'm
with
talking
the hops? Like the hops.
Yeah, with the hop.
Yeah. It was
at Holy
Havoc last year.
Holy Havoc last year. There you go. Yeah.
I know his face, and I'm blanking on his
Yep.
name.
I know, but
He was in the Gibbering Dome too, and I'm blanking because
the point was that's a tournament. It's okay.
Yep.
This was a tournament. It still ostensibly used the trappings of match play, right? That is to say, we were playing 2,000-point games, although we did have this extra character called a warlord, so we had this sort of role-playing-esque character brought in. But then over the course of it, they made themselves an actual story. Alex did the same thing at Holy Wars with his goblin, with his Grot general, who was based on can't think of his name. Tilting at windmills.
Was it Brennan Lynch or Dominic Reitman?
I don't.
Dominic.
Remember.
It's Dominic. Dominic is the hop
Dominic?
story. Yep.
There you go. So
Absolutely.
Dominic had the hop story. The point is, in both those things, and I'm sorry, I can't think of the very famous character.
Cervantes.
Yeah. Yep.
Don Quixote?
Don Quixote. There you go.
Yes.
We'll get there eventually.
There you go. Thank you. Can't believe I couldn't summon that to my mind. That's my post-fever brain. But at any rate, and he had his little goblin was little Don Quixote and would go around tilting at all these windmills, and he was and he had the narrative that he kept putting onto his trifold poster board and stuff. It was fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, but those people were still playing, match play 2,000-point games. Their games still looked a lot like it, even though in Steve's tournament it is a very narrative flavored tournament in how it's working because the things the tables are doing and stuff like that. So you can be on that end of the spectrum, but you can also you can go way over, right? And I think the important part that you mentioned there was oftentimes once you get out of that kind of a setting, there's no reason that you can't move slightly off the competitive footing and into the more collaborative footing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you were talking about. It's about a shared experience with your opponents at that group. It's much, once you comfortably accept that kind of a footing, it becomes much easier to do 3, 4, 5 player games, whatever you want to do, to have roles, to have different, to have the story evolving, to have people taking on different elements, and not always being quote unquote fair, right? Well, whatever that means.
Sure. I mean, what I would also say is that I think that there's an element of it that we haven't really talked about, which is that sometimes narrative gaming takes the form of of additional rule set frameworks that we've all kind of agreed to that add elements that like change the value decisions of army compositions, of all of those other things. So I think about things like so if you had like a map campaign,
right,
that controls like what you're gaining and what's going on and claiming territory, and it's linking a bunch of like game nights, like Saturday night Warhammer game nights or whatever your weekly game. That framing is itself, it's creating a narrative around what's going on. I think about things like even doing like Triumph and Treachery. Like there's mechanics around it, but it's about betrayal and all that stuff, and those mechanics and like spending the points to like do special things. All of that, it's very mechanical, but it's also adding like a narrative framework that isn't in just like match play.
Yep.
Well, right. And as Pete Foley has mentioned on several podcasts, right? Match play is lazy, right? Match play is we literally give you everything. You show up at the table. You don't have to have a conversation with your opponent other than we're playing a 2,000-point match play game. I don't have to be nice. I don't have to do anything, right? And I just show up. We know what's going on. We play a game, and when it's decided, we're done, right? Narrative, in my mind, I know this is personal, but like in my mind, it's far more about walking up to the table and saying, all right, hi, my name is so-and-so. This is my army. Let me tell you about it, right? Now we have this scenario that we're going to play, and I'm going to do my best to win that scenario because this is, we're playing a match play game. But I'm going to tell you what my army is and what my army's goals are. So when the scenario is over, I don't have to give up and say, well, there's nothing worth playing for anymore because you've already won on points, or I've already won on points. So we might as well just stop playing. I didn't walk up to the table for a scenario. I walked up to the table for a game with a fellow hobbyist. I walked up to engage in a social engagement with this person, right? Like I walked up to possibly make my new best friend. Like, honestly, that's how I approach games. If if you were anywhere else in the world and you're able to just walk up to a table and say, hi, you have something you're passionate about. I have something that I'm passionate about. We both already know it. Let's have a great time for the next 2 hours. Quitting after the scenario is done or saying, all we have to do is really play out the scenario, to me, is forfeiting an hour and a half, 30 minutes of valuable interaction with another passionate hobbyist. Why in the world would you ever give that up, right? I can go and drink a beer anywhere, at any time, at my house, anywhere. I can only play Warhammer with specific people at specific times.
Right.
And especially if you're at a tournament where somebody has a beautifully painted 2,000-point army, why is it not okay to just sit and listen to them tell you about their army, right? You engage them and allow them to engage you. And you can have an incredible game that you would talk about for the next 2 hours, as opposed to, well, yeah, I won 9-7. So I have so many points, and therefore I'm at this point in the list, right?
Right. No, and that's
fun,
the point. It's there's so much of a chance here from, like I said, the spectrum is so broad. To me, that's one of the interesting things about narrative gaming is that when we think about what match play is, match play runs from sort of this kind of short end of the spectrum that's basically like, well, we're using the points and playing another strictures match play, and that's fine. And then there's also tournament play, which I see as something sort of a step over from that, right? Sort of the hardest, most strict form of match play, right? And that's kind of that spectrum, and there's different takes on that, and of course none of that means it's not friendly, none of that means it's not nice, none of that means people aren't, putting a lot of passion and stuff into their army. Of course they are.
Some of the most competitive games have been the most friendly people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
People are still friendly, people are still passionate, people are still absolutely involved in what they're doing. And then what's interesting is you've got this nice overlap there that's right there where matched and narrative can be all in that same spot. And the narrative just runs way over here where it can go from like highly structured to highly destructured. Narrative opens the door to things like having a game master, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Another element that we just don't generally have the need for that other than the occasional judge call. And that's not really a game master. That's just somebody acting as a neutral arbitrator.
Arbitrator.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. but you can like actively have, as many events have shown, you can actively have a GM going through and literally changing the state of play by introducing elements. Like this is something that happens that has happened at Raw and places like that a lot, where the GM will come around the table and say, "This is now a new situation that's happening. Okay, go keep dealing with that. Continue with the game."
At Gibbering Dome last year, we had 16 players, but we also had 4 GMs. So it was me, Chuck Moore, Matt as well, Chuck's friends Matt, and then Heath from Milwaukee. And we each had, I gave everybody their own table, right? And they were the GM for that table. And so players could elect to switch tables, switch opponents, etc. And Chuck's table is just like, we're going to stay with Chuck. We're just having a great time. And like Chuck's table told a completely different story than Keith's table or my table or Matt's table, right? And that's amazing, right? Like the opportunity to be able to play with 5 passionate hobbyists instead of 1, right? And tell that story. And that's really not a space that we have. We don't really have much space to be creative with other people in our lives. And even for 2-3 hours, like that's just an incredible experience. And to limit it, because this is what Match Play says that we should play the game, right? On Undesign, Vince always talks about rule 0. If the rule doesn't make sense, throw it out. I don't care. Just have a fun time.
Right.
And if you look at Age of Sigmar is rife with rule 0 of like, look, you don't like this rule? Fine. Throw it out. But we have this understanding that Match Play is every rule, every time, for every reason.
Right, or that we're both operating completely neutrally on this sort of fair, even plane. Whereas in Narrative, you don't have to have that same agreement. You and your opponent can have any sort of structured agreement. You can ditch anything you want. You can add anything you want. As you mentioned, somebody mentioned what's the new system coming out with 9th edition Crusade, where you'll be able to like evolve your army and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I really hope we get a framework thing like that for AOS beyond beyond Path to Glory. I'm not interested. I want to make my army, and I want to tell the story of my army. I don't want to build from 3 units, right? I have an army. I want to play my army narratively over time. I want to develop a character. I want him to get. I want a general to get a sucking chest wound. I want somebody else to get some kind of commendation and do some get some BA unique special abilities. Like that's cool stuff, right?
Well, and just imagine walking up to the table, if you having this story about your army and your opponent having this story about your army, and telling the story to each other, and then playing out that story on the tabletop. Like, there is no more interactive than to say, I'm literally allowing the story to happen together, and let's have some fun. Like, I played a game at Adepticon where we were on the bottom table, so whatever. But we were playing KO versus KO, and my opponent was like, hey, what if when a ship blows up, it actually blows up? Let's actually like cause a detonation. So we made up a rule about how many wounds would happen within D6 inches whenever a ship went down.
Can I just say, but just slight quick aside, 40K has that rule for most of its vehicles. Most vehicles are explosive.
Exactly.
When they die, there's a chance they blow up and do a bunch more wounds to everything around it. KO, that is a missed opportunity that KO ships do not have that same rule. Just throw that out.
It's inert gas. We're fine. Everything's fine here.
Everything's fine here.
We're gonna bail out. And it just lands like a cushion. And they're like, everybody out of the wreckage. We're good. Everything's fine here.
Totally about this rule. So continue.
And what it really allows is when you have these rules, you can add rules and you don't have to worry about them being perfect. You don't have to worry about them working in the next game. You can just say, look, right now, this is cool. Let's add this and make this part of our story. Right? Well, and why would you not do that? Why would you not?
So the one thing that I would add to this is that I think that there's a value in, like, there's actually value added in campaign style play that I think that we haven't tapped into because it changes the value decisions that are being made in the game itself. So like for those that are even more spike leaning, right, that are more like they just want to win. In a game where you lose, and like even in casual play, it like that like there's feel bad there. But if you're in the middle of a campaign and there's like other things being accomplished, and like even if losing not as bad has value carrying forward, or secondary objectives that carry on into the actual the larger campaign stuff that's going on. Like there's really value added for all the different player types in campaign play that just simply isn't there in matched play.
Well,
and
I feel
like
let me hold on. I want to hit one thing real quick because I want to respond, because Jack, rerolling ones, Jack is in the comments, and he made a really good point that not everybody's really comfortable with sort of going off this way, and this is a super fair point. Like I've been playing RPGs and running games and doing narrative storytelling for more than 30 years. Okay, so like I'm super comfortable to just break into this and start making my own crap. Between 10 plus years of doing, actually writing games, and then and doing that sort of thing, it's second nature. But that's not going to be the case for everybody. And that's why these kinds of narrative frameworks, like a Crusade style system, if we get it for AOS or whatever, these kinds of things that give you the tools that you can then choose how you use them to create your story, I think are really valuable. Right? Because it's not fair to just say, oh, well, yeah, you can tell your own story. Yes, if you're a very creative person and you got it in you, great, then it's easy. You're going to be off to the races. But if that's not your personal bag, and there's no judgment on that, by the way, like that's just not in some people's skill sets. There's nothing wrong with having those tools, in the same way we have, by the way, 1,000 tools to make you a better match play gamer.
Right.
And I if that's not something that you're comfortable doing, right, but you're interested in this idea of narrative gaming, pick up Ether War. Pick up the Gloomspite and the Sylvaneth box, right? There are some incredible narrative scenarios in those books. The lore is amazing. The scenarios are great. They give you all kinds of ideas of how to do your game differently, right? And it is such a value add to those boxes that no one has talked about. Everybody looks at them as like, oh, this is the value of the miniatures in the box. Right. But if you literally just buy the miniatures, and this has always been one of my sticking points, right? Everybody is constantly like, well, the value of the miniatures is only based on what the battle tome says. And if you buy this starter box, it's not equal points value to this other half of the starter box, because if you look at the battle tome, it says this, and you look at the other battle tome, it says this, right? Just look at the miniatures in the battle box. Just do the scenarios that are there. And then if you want to add stuff, great, add it. But you already have all these custom-made narrative rules for your force that you can move forward with. And once you're comfortable with that, then you could definitely add something like that, right? Or if that's all you want to do, that's fine. You found 3, 4, 5 great games that have a narrative focus that have allowed you to tell a story, right? And the thing is, and maybe this is me being a little bit of a poster child or whatever, but why does losing a game have to be the worst possible thing that can happen when you walk up to a game of Warhammer?
Well, it's certainly not. When you're in this sort of mindset, that it just and you, especially if you within the narrative, you have a lot of other specific and interesting goals and things that can come out of it. Losing becomes much less of an issue, to be honest, because you're just playing for different. You're playing for different goals.
Right, and that's why, like, I think that's the value of the campaign structure as well. Is when there is a campaign structure, there like you have other goals that aren't necessarily the primary objective. And, you know, I can think of a ton of Mordheim campaign stuff where, like, I'm like, okay, well, I've lost this, right? But I need to make decisions now in order to make sure that I don't end up with sucking chest wounds, or that I can still achieve like secondary objectives.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about to me, Tom, really sounds like Warcry, but for AOS, right? Well, you've got those campaigns, and winning or losing doesn't necessarily matter. It can give you a slight advantage, but it doesn't end it for you, right?
Right.
But I think the thing is, right, and this has always been a problem for me. Now, full disclosure, I have won tournaments, right? I've won several tournaments in a row, back in 8th edition, obviously. But the thing is, if we're talking about losing being the worst thing that happens, there's, at best, in a 200-man tournament, one person who is not going to have the worst thing happen out of 200 players. And 199 players are going to have the worst thing happen, right? This can't be the way that we play
at
Warhammer.
Least once.
Right? At least once. Right? And even the person who wins might lose the game, but secondary objectives might have carried it for them, right? We need to get away from this whole idea that losing a game means that you are a worse player, means that everything is over, and it's the worst possible thing that can happen when you walk up to a table and play against another player, right? The worst possible thing when you walk up to a table and play against another player is for that player to cheat, right? Or for that player to break your models. There are so many higher standards of this is the worst thing that happened to me in a game of Warhammer than losing, right? It's a 50% chance when you walk up to a table with another player who is about as good as you, who's going to win and who's going to lose. And what determines that is this little plastic thing that has 6 sides, right?
Sure.
Your strategy helps, but at the end of the day, if you have the wrong dice roll at the wrong time, it kind of doesn't matter how well your strategy works out, because you can always find one point of the game where this is where I lost it, or this is where I won it, out of the thousands of dice rolls that you have over the course of the game, right? And when you say that narrative gaming is for people who lose games, what you're saying is that losing games is the worst outcome. And it's just patently untrue.
I mean, again, I don't know. Losing games is pretty terrible. But
yeah,
I mean, losing games is not what you go to a tournament to do, right?
Right.
But it's not the worst thing that can happen. There are so many more worse things that can happen in this social interaction, right? You can walk up to somebody and have the worst game in the world just because they don't feel like talking. They're sitting and playing on their
I've had many bad games,
right?
where I won, and it was because of just the nature of the game. Yes,
and who
I've
cares
had many
that you
great
won the
games
game?
Yeah.
I'm going to value that game a whole lot less than somebody who was willing to talk to me and like engage in this social contract.
Right. Yeah, like having people just walk away from the table mid-game is just the worst.
Yeah.
Right, Vince?
I'll walk away from you all the time, Tom. I do not hesitate on walking away from a game with Tom. He knows what he's doing. He knows his minutia that he's getting into. He doesn't need me around for this. So, yeah, I absolutely walk away from Tom. But other than that, no. I try to be responsible for the most part. Anyway, all right, I want to get into this. So I want to hit a little bit up of the Gibbering Dome, because you mentioned this, and this is kind of this can be a fun thing to jump into. And I do want to keep the show somewhat reasonably length tonight, because I'm going to lose my voice at some point. So
there.
That's all. But I'm going to bring up the Dome here, and I just want you to kind of talk us through this. This was going to be an event, as you mentioned, you were going to run at Adepticon, and 2+ Tough can help you cover. I will link the video below, by the way, for 2+ doing the narrative. So if people are interested, 2+ did the Gibbering Dome narrative, which is really cool. So I'll throw that down below. Okay, so walk us through.
All right. So the Gibbering Dome has actually gone on for several years at Adepticon. It was at 2019, it was at 2018, and then it was at Coalescence before that. So the Gibbering Dome is a bespoke narrative setting that I created whole cloth in order to create a space where functionally you are out of the sight of the gods. One of the defining things about Age of Sigmar is that the gods are real. When you have faith in the gods, they respond to your faith by giving you actual boons, actual things. And so what I thought would be interesting is to make a space that was beyond the sight of that. So the Gibbering Dome is a massive building that is suspended in the middle of the void. It used to be suspended between Akshi and Shaman, if I recall correctly. And it has been loosened by Teclis's machinations. But in its heyday, it was a center of learning, a center of intelligence, and a place to really understand everything that it was. And there were these massive colossi called the Dertaref that would you to know everything that was going on. They had access to all the knowledge of the realms that was. Teclis saw this as a threat and unbound its power, and now it is this spinning wreck, basically in the middle of the void, that has become a narrative focus that allows people to draw in and create their own stories within this subrealm. So that was the intention of creating the Dome. There is actually a PDF available for download on themortalrealms.com/the-gibbering-dome. That is the complete pack that was for 2019, and there will be another pack that's up there soon, just as the setting itself. And so, as I said, the idea was to create a complete narrative space. So if you want to match play in Gibbering Dome, go fill your boots, right? But I was particularly intrigued by this idea where D&D has these specific parts of their worlds. For example, the Moonshae Isles with the Adventurers Guild, where certain conventions get a specific space where if something's going to happen there, you have to go to the convention, you have to play in a D&D game run by one of their GMs, and then you can push the narrative forward through that activity. And so the idea was to create a space like that within AOS to allow players to push the narrative instead of necessarily the game itself, the writers, and just allow people to have a place to explore, a place to destroy, a place to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So I'm just kind of scrolling through here. Lots of good pictures. Like you said, this new version will go up along with everything here in a couple days, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'll link everybody to the existing version, and you can watch that. And that has sort of people can see what it looked like when the last time you ran it, which was 2019. That's
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to flip back over to you here, Paul, and minimize this. When you were running this, what did you see? So you ran this a couple years. How did this play out? Like, for those who are still like, well, I don't get it. What's going on? What's different? Like, give the play experience here for folks, what they were encountering when they rolled up to this event at Adepticon.
So one of the things that I really enjoy in the social contract is just making a game that you can get nowhere else, right? Again, as Pete Foley said, match play is easy mode. Anybody can walk up to a 6x4 table, throw some terrain on the table, 2,000 point army, go and have fun. And so when Coalescence first happened, I really wanted to make kind of a very enjoyable experience for Eric and Davey, who were two of the people who were heavily invested in making Coalescence exist. And so I started creating this bespoke terrain out of expanded PVC, care of the Bishmeister. And so I really wanted to create this own specific place. And then it evolved as I started working on it into its own setting. And so when you play in the Gibbering Dome, you don't play on a 6x4 table, right? There are places where your models can't go. There are heights. So at the moment, it's between 3 and 4 inches. So your models actually have to climb upstairs. They can't see from one place to another. And you create more of a very specific narrative setting to make you have different choices about how to play the game, other than this unit has a 24-inch range, and therefore I can see this unit over here unless there's a woods, because that blocks line of sight, right? It's more of you have to take your army, and it might be a 2,000 point or 1,000 point match play army, right? And I've invited players who had no intention of playing in the Dome to come and play, and the battlefield changes the way that you play the army. Not because you have so much terrain that you can't do anything, but the scenarios encourage you to really enter into the story and create your own narrative for your characters, right? If you walk into this game and you play 3 games through this scenario and you don't have a story for your character, you weren't really trying, right? And that's fine. If you had a great time, great. But really what it was meant to be is a place to start that narrative or continue that narrative hook. And one of the things that I did is I really enjoyed elevating the table. So most tables are going to be about, 42 inches, between 35 and 42 inches is the standard table height. And so I actually made pillars and platforms that allowed you to move 4 to 8 inches up. And one of the cool things that happens is when you bend down and you look at the table for line of sight, but the table is 8 inches or 12 inches higher than you thought it was, you're actually looking your opponent in the eye. And you actually start having conversations about what your character can see and what's going on. And it just created a really awesome atmosphere where everybody was able to talk to other players. I mean, there's 16 players, but everybody was able to talk to everyone else and talk about what was going on and make alliances and break alliances and really immerse themselves in the gaming as opposed to immersing themselves in the scenario.
Sure.
And it was such an awesome time in 2018. I was like, I have to do this in 2019, 2020, so 2021 as well. So it's definitely going to continue.
Yeah, and I think this is when I look at the, Aaron, who runs the Nova narrative event, when you look at the narrative track that happens there, what's fascinating is people can come in, they can jump in, they can jump off, they can participate as much as they want. They can bring their story, and they're going to meet the story that Aaron has prepared for them. A lot is happening in between games, which is fascinating. So they'll have like councils of the various players in between games.
Yep.
They'll have votes. They'll make decisions. Gold is exchanged. Favor is curried and bought, and that gives advantages and disadvantages to the forces in the next game. Like there's when you do one of these narrative tracks, and if you really get involved with it, it can become something you can participate in throughout the entire weekend. Because there's lots of different ways that you're intersecting with it beyond simply the hours of the table where you're staring down your opponent. That's still happening, right? But there can be a lot more to it as well, which I think is super cool. Because it does give you more of that, like if that's the type of experience you're used to of something like a role playing or that kind of a D&D type experience, just to use that shorthand. Right, that's a good way that you suddenly get to experience that.
Yeah,
and so I think that's just a really neat element of these sorts of narrative events that you just don't have in other scenarios. Even if you're trying to create it on your own, it's just hard. The great part about here is you've got people like Paul, you've got people like Aaron who put a lot of work into creating all these scenarios and managing. And sort of, like I said before, GMing and running the intra-game things that are happening and events that are happening and story that's unfolding and taking an active role in shaping it, which I think it's cool, right?
Yeah.
And so, Paul, you've started a firestorm of comments, of comments by calling matched play easy mode. So let's I get what you're saying. But I'll put a pin on it here for what I think.
All right.
What I think is the fair way to mean this, and I think this is a reasonable way to look at this. What matched play is asking of you to bring of yourself to the game is generally a fairly low bar. That is to say, it's asking for your attention. It's asking for you to have put together a list. And it's asking for you to understand what your units and your things are. So you must have some level of passion and attention and focus. And then it's asking you to play according to the rules. It's not that it's easy. It can be quite challenging, as a matter of fact, especially depending on the army, the opponent, and things like that.
Yeah.
I think what is being said there is but it's not asking you to create new rules, to create new experiences, to weave anything from whole cloth. Whereas often, especially as you go deeper onto that side of the spectrum with narrative gaming, it is asking you to do that. And there is a higher bar of creativity to it. The same way that, like, if you've ever played in a role-playing game, a weekly RPG, it tends to be a lot easier to be a player and show up to that game weekly than it does to be the GM. And where you have to prepare a lot of material for your players to encounter. Especially as you go sort of farther in and deeper into that narrative spectrum, it's asking you to bring more of yourself, right, in that same way, to engage more of that creativity. Neither of these things are wrong. I hope we've been super clear about that.
Oh, yeah.
Neither are they separate, as I think I made abundantly clear earlier at the very beginning of this. So hopefully we're not misconstruing anything.
Well, and when I say that it's easy mode, right, like playing a good game shouldn't be easy if it's match play or narrative, right? If you can look at me and say that I started a firestorm by saying that match play is easy mode, why can you look at me and say that saying narrative gaming is an easy mode and not expect me to react to that?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what I actually said was match play is all played out for you. You build a 2,000 point list. Your opponent knows they're bringing 2,000 points. You're doing match play. You know where you're rolling, right? You literally walk up to the table and you don't have to have a conversation. You don't have to talk the same language as the person across the table for you. Setting up that game is easy mode. It is. It is using everything that the rules writers have given you in order to play the game. Now, who wins and who loses, right? That definitely is something that is not easy mode, right? Not anybody can walk up to the table, pick up an army, and win 5 games, 6 games in a 200-person tournament. That's not a thing, right? But neither can everybody walk up to a table with a full set of narrative and say, this is the story we're going to play, and we're going to move forward, right?
Yeah, I think there's complexity to all of this. Yeah, 100%. Yes, it's just different types of complexity engaging different parts of your creativity.
But there does need to be a conversation with your opponent beforehand of, we're not playing match play. How about we have a conversation about what kind of game that we want to play, right? And you have to actually talk to your opponent about what you're looking to get out of the game. Yep. I'm not looking to get a win or a loss. I'm looking to get a story, or I'm looking to get this completely different experience where we blow up our ships or do something else, right? And so that's all that I'm saying, and that's what Pete Foley said, and I completely agree with him when it comes to this.
So if you're angry at that statement, the key is you're angry at Pete Foley, go yell at him. There you go.
Mean, you're welcome to yell at me as well. I don't care. But,
sure.
I completely agree with his statement wholeheartedly. That
I get it. I just don't want to bang on this too hard. Because I know that we'll draw battle lines if we keep going. We will end up in a match play game. All right. So let's do this. I think we've talked a lot about the narratives in the tournament, the narratives as we see it, and how these games are structured. But I think it's important that we sort of end our discussion here as start trending toward the end of our discussion. This is going to be a somewhat full discussion. I think in the end, of course, we all love the narrative, and we all love narrative. Beyond just narrative play, we all love the narrative of this game. Because in the end, it's what decides the releases. It's what moves the bigger story forward in the world. It's what shapes it, right? When you look now at what's leading them into 9th edition, it's the entire story of this Psychic Awakening, which has been this very narrative story-driven thing for them in 40K. For us, we had, the Realm Gate Wars.
That led, Malign Portents led into Soul Wars.
Right, and then we had the Soul Wars. We've had all this, right? And I think that so we have to all acknowledge that this is the most narratively driven, yes, that the game has ever been or felt ever. The entire Wrath of the Ever-Chosen book really feels like a completely narratively driven sort of Battle Tome expansion, right? When I read it, I literally sat down and read through the whole story first, right? Yep. And when you read that whole story, then you go look at all the rules in the end. You're like, oh yeah, these all make complete sense because I just read that story, right? This is exactly what happened. It's a cool story, actually. I quite like I quite like everything that happens in there. I want to see more stuff like that, as I've mentioned. I think we should have about 1 or 2 of those products per year at minimum.
Yeah.
So, now, gentlemen, where do we want to go? Can be a big story, can be a small story, can be an individual character. But as the Mortal Realms continue to get shaped by the narrative, what is the narrative that you want to see happening in the world, in the Mortal Realms, as it were, going forward over the next 3 years?
All right. Well, there's a difference between what I want to see and what I think is going to happen.
You can we'll frame it as usual in either way, or you could give me a likelihood on a 1 through 10 scale, right? 10 being it happens definitely, 1 being only in your dreams, or however you want to do it.
What I think is going to happen is Gordrak is going to go destroy Excelsis.
Okay.
And we're going to actually have something destroyed, right? Excelsis should have been in Cities of Sigmar. It wasn't.
Right.
There's an offhanded comment about how Excelsis wasn't long for this world. Gordrak's got this big battering ram. and he's headed towards Excelsis. So I think that's definitely something that's going to happen, right? As far as what
hold on, I want to drill in on this just a minute.
Yeah.
Do you think he ends up actually like? Does just Excelsis fall, or does Gordrak actually get into Aesir as a whole?
I don't know how that would. I don't know why Gordrak would want to go into Aesir.
I tend to agree. Like
to punch Sigmar, but yeah, go ahead.
My honest answer is so. I'm absolutely a stan of this prediction. By the way, I think I think you're dead on with this. Like this, I give this one like a hot 10. I think Excelsis gets destroyed. I do not think Gordrak gets into Aesir. I think they leave Aesir for a long time like Terra. It's sort of this untouched sacred ground, right? It is meant to be this because its existence and its being safe and not a freaking war zone is actually serving a really important purpose in the mortal realms.
It shows that good can win.
Yes. It's this incredible bastion of hope that keeps it from being this like just awful beyond grimdark nightmare.
Well, it shows them what they're fighting for.
Right. Yeah. I think it's the home front concept, right?
Yeah.
So
it's the normal where everything else can be compared to and be like, oh look, this isn't normal.
Right.
You see all these other realms, they're not normal. You see the gloaming, that's not normal. Right.
Yep. So I'm with you on this prediction. I think this one's high.
I will say I think that it is Destruction's turn. So I think that Destruction is the new big bad. And whatever big narrative move we get. I would even wonder if, like, obviously All Point has been a flashpoint, right?
Sure.
I wonder if that isn't involved here. Right, but like obviously the orcs have controlled the Gur portal, like we've known that.
Yep.
It makes me wonder if like the answer isn't that it just like they come spilling into the All Points and through the All Points spill into a bunch of different realms. Like it's truly like a Green Tide style story, like a tsunami of orky, goblin-y gitsiness.
Do you see that as being like that they are? How much longer do you think we stay in the Soul Wars until next year?
Yeah, like next year when 3rd edition rolls.
Like, I mean, whether or not they do 3rd edition, it would kind of make sense that next year would be a big transition point, right?
Yeah, like next year, like we have some big narrative push, and I honestly think that I'll go as far as to say that I think that I've said it a couple times and say it again. I think next year is 3rd edition. I think next year is Destruction moved to the front and center.
Okay.
I think that I think we move out of the Soul Wars and into the big dust up. Because like in my mind they have one of two ways they go narratively. Either they go into Soul Wars. Or into like a Destruction like dust up, or they go into some type of civil war, like order-based civil war, where you get like the Dark Elves release, and or you have something that's really causing division within the ranks, especially like if it's related to Slaanesh. I could see something like that happening. Because I think in the big narrative move, I think what happens is that Slaanesh is going to break free. Like we've been waiting on it for a while. I think it's going to happen soon.
Well, yes, I would tend to agree with that. That's my if you told me I have a year, if you say within the next 12 months, I mean, I'm betting a hot 10 on that one because you'll get the like Mortal Slaanesh type of follow up, coinciding with her breaking her chains. Like Archeon broke one of the chains and then got called away to go deal with nonsense.
The Death Rattle, right?
Because Catacross had gotten too close, right? But I mean, he can clearly go back there. I will point out that the first showing of the Lumineth Realm Lords in the story did not go well for them.
That was awesome.
He shows up and just smashes through them.
I feel it's telling.
Phalanxes of them
because
fold, and then he breaks a chain, and then he's like, and he leaves.
they kind of need 6s for those mortals, and he kind of makes them re-roll that.
That's a good point.
So it's a thing.
It's a good counter.
Yeah, it's a really good counter.
Yeah, I mean, Teclis wasn't there, so they didn't get the 5+. So
there you go. Yeah,
kind of out of luck.
Yep.
It's really rough.
Yep. Yeah, just a rough go of it. No, I think that there's. I think that we're really. I think that we get Slaanesh freed, and I wonder if like Slaanesh, the freeing isn't like ironic and accidental. And what I mean by that is like I wonder if like the green tide just smashes up, like it's just a big like they just come bashing through and like accidentally just in breaking things free Slaanesh.
Like I think it'll terrible. I think it'll absolutely be an intentional thing. There will be Skaven there.
There will be.
They're always there.
Well, but the Skaven don't want Slaanesh freed, right?
No, I'm sure they
like
don't.
that's part.
They
that's
will
part
be
of the
there
point of it.
trying to stop whatever it is, and as usual, get in the way and cause something chaotic to happen. That's always the story.
Sure.
So I have a question for you guys. Do you think the all points then becoming the 8 points is a holding pattern for when the narrative is not moving forward? We can focus on this area and leave the rest of the realms alone until something else happens.
Yeah, I think
they'll
it's
want a great flashpoint.
Exactly. I think they'll actually establish a couple of things like that. So we've got the all points, right? And it's sort of become this one, there's a dust up of everybody through kind of everybody has reason to be there for some minor way, right?
Right.
But it's largely this death versus chaos butting heads, right?
Right.
And I think what they'll do is, like you mentioned, Excelsius, right? And so maybe that becomes a flashpoint where, like, and whatever that middle ground is there that gets held becomes a dust up of, like, an order destruction flashpoint, right? Because I think what they want to do is they want to establish a couple of these narrative points that are around that they can actually, like, make trade hands, change, use to set stories in, have gains, have losses. You know what I mean? Because it's not then the whole sweep of the mortal realms, because that's too big. You're not just going to say, like, order's no longer in fire, chaos, or Noxy, chaos 1.
Right.
Like, that's not going to happen. Right? That's too big. But if they create these narrative hotspots, right, then those you can move around it. You can play in. They can set things there. They can have, like I said, gains and losses, right? Like Catacross could be pushed back to his fortress and be on the edge of losing, and then suddenly here come to orcs as like boom, in comes the third party, like Tom mentioned, and all of a sudden we got a whole new game on our hands, right?
And then Archaon gets headbutted, and then it just gets all rewritten.
There you go. I do think that the appropriate end to the Soul Wars is the release of Slaanesh, who is factored so heavily into the nature of what it means for these souls being reclaimed. Right.
See, I'm wondering if Nagash's Nadir is actually going to become a flashpoint, because what he has done is he had inverted the realm of Shyish,
right,
where the edge of the realm is no longer the dangerous part. It's now the center of the realm, because he has reined everything into the Nadir. So I'm wondering if that's actually going to cause some major long-term issues, right? Because if the center becomes dangerous as opposed to the outside, right, is there some kind of gravity with all the magic being in the center of the realm that's going to throw things off, right? Are we going to see just not necessarily the realms torn apart, but then stuff just starting to move around, right? Places going different places. Is Nagash going to lose power? Is he going to be discorporated? Like, there's a lot of potential there for that to happen.
Yeah, you have to wonder if they'd make a bold enough move. Like, I think we're probably beyond the point where, like, if you have a model and it's a cornerstone model, you're basically safe in the story right now. Now, I don't think that should be the case. I think those characters should still absolutely be able to live, die in the narrative. Because, by the by, it doesn't actually matter. You can be playing your army from, like, time periods are vast.
Nagash has died so many times, too.
Well, can I actually build on that? Like, as an idea? Sure. Is that maybe that's the answer to fixing death.
Get him out of the way for a little while. put him into a rebuilding phase where he gets destroyed, and then the Mortarks have to like take over. Well, they know he's not dead. Like he never stays dead. We all know he'll be back. But it's going to take like 100 years or 200 years for him to rebuild him to his dumb self, right?
And so
then it leaves the Mortarks to
round
clean
of
up.
releases. So the next round of releases, right?
Yep.
Is that's why the Legions of Nagash blow up into 4 different books.
Yeah.
Based on each Mortark, is that like Nagash isn't around.
Yeah.
And then so what ends up happening is that the Mortarks in their combined forces, or their individual forces, have to actually like take the point on the development of like the trajectory of death.
Which would then bring the vampires into power as they're scrabbling over the scraps that the Mortarks can't control.
Sure. That would be a perfect excuse to get your own individual legions, like to build out a vampire army, to have...
that'd be super interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea, Tom.
It solves the problem of the Legions of Nagash book itself, right?
Yeah.
Of the army being monolithic. And they could even still, like, have Nagash show up as, like, that's not, like, obviously... Whenever Nagash shows up on the battlefield, he's always like shards of Nagash, like they're remnants, they're avatars, and so they could even lean into that of like he's not there to lead the everything, but the echoes of him can still be found.
Sure, I mean he'd still be in the story just because like in the actual narrative he's dead, but while he's rebuilding, he's still whispering in his Mortark's ears.
Yes,
right, because like just as any ultra powerful character like that, they never. I mean, look, we put Sauron out of commission for quite a while, but he was still around doing some shady stuff for a long time, right? So,
well, that's been established that's what Nagash does in Black Library novels. Even when he was rebuilding, he just whispers and like can appear for a moment, right?
Right.
So the other element, like I'm going to jump topics real quick.
Sure.
Because we're talking about like these narrative developments. I agree with Nagash; they have to do something there. And I think that, like, especially for going into a new edition with a new launch of books, like that solves that problem, like narratively. Because again, what you had said leading into this segment, Vince, is that like the narrative, like, it frames all releases and it drives all like everything that AOS is driven by the narrative.
Right.
It is like we need to come to terms with that. And so if you want to know where we're going release wise, look at the developments in the narrative.
Yep, sure.
And so, like, I think that's the solution to the Nagash problem, in the Legions of Nagash and all that stuff is some type of fracturing of death, probably, because of Nagash losing control, and falling, and then, and discorporating. I think that destruction is the next kind of like front and center. And I wonder if the answer to that, by the way, isn't a thread that we've like seemingly forgot about, which are the god beasts.
Sure.
I wonder if they're not ready to just come like go full kaiju and like take back some of the realms.
Sure. Yeah, like the next narrative could be quite literally the war for civilization. Right. And it could actually have, even to the point where if you get the sort of god beast turned wild in the broader narrative, right? And they're sort of out there spinning destruction into a frenzy. And chaos,
because, rather than
them being rampant
orcs,
would send them up
like
into
a god beast.
Yep.
Like the whatever Wog is being generated, or whatever, it's actually influencing and stirring up the pinnacles, the true avatars of destruction, which would be the god beasts. And then you could have some really interesting developments all across. You could have like a Children of the God Beast generation or release where you could do something like a bunch of like elemental-esque, like there's just so many really interesting. I mean, that's kind of what Sons of Bahamut are. Like, let me just point that out. Like that, it was this like super Gargant, like that they all descended from, and yada yada.
I will also say, by the by, that there is another interesting narrative choice they could make. Okay. Yep. Which is, we push the battles into all of these hotspots. The soul wars come to an end, and we get the Cold War times. Okay? This would be a very unusual choice for them, but this would be amazing. So let me see if I can frame what I'm saying here. I call this, I'll give this one like a 3 out of 10 on possibility, okay?
Yep.
So there are hotspots where battles are happening. They are in
Yep.
the All Points and Excelsius and whatever else they decide to frame, right? And
Right.
out here. But for the most part, and largely across the walls of civilization between chaos and death, because maybe Nagash is dead and the Mortarks have to rebuild. Maybe destruction has been cowed or whatever, right? Like they're kind of in their whatever they're doing. They're always just running around being nonsensical, but they're largely under control. And chaos and order have come into this balance, and so we get a détente period, okay, where then the releases you have are the spy and those kinds of focused things. You
like
mentioned
your Eshin.
You mentioned the Eshin earlier. This would be the narrative trick you'd use to bring Malarian and his vast network of spies and assassins and stuff like that in there.
Yeah.
They could launch a specific new product like around doing that sort of thing. Like you could relaunch a sort of Black Fortress, but make it more of like almost a conspiracy-based thing where you're moving around the city or whatever.
Cities of deceit. Cities of deceit instead of cities of Sigmar.
Exactly.
Yeah, cities of death, cities of destruction, cities of chaos. Like
exactly. So
there's a whole thread they could pull there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this would suddenly where the eye turns away from the broad open battlefields. Like there's still battles happening. There's still plenty of framing to do all your fun big battles, right? But the major focus of what's happening in the story turns into these bastions of civilization where this uneasy peace, this Berlin, like Cold War period Berlin is happening, and you've got like spies jumping the walls, and like you've got Malarian and his vast networks and Tzeentch's vast spy networks and Clan Eshin, and just like everybody's buying and selling information and assassinating key targets. Like that would be an amazing year or two of stories to trot out, right? And you could
3 years.
Sure.
That's the cycle we're on.
I mean, whatever. They could be anything. And you could so use that to frame out a ton of new releases. Right? So.
Yeah, I think another thread they could pull is they already kind of mentioned it, but if the gods start to lose power and control over the realms or start to lose some essence, right?
Yeah.
So you have Be'lakor take over as the Everchosen instead of Archaon. Perhaps Slaanesh comes down and takes the all points, right? And you start having these undedicated demons, right? You start having these non-worshipping people, non-worshipping races that start to take over where the gods are not listening, right?
Sure.
They have all retreated, and so there's a lot of definitely fruitful avenues to take here.
Yeah. Any other specific calls we want to make before we call this a night, gentlemen? Any other specific narrative shots you want to call? You want to point to the audience? You want to point to the crowd?
I mean, you could just make the Bad Moon crash down anywhere, and that would be an incredible narrative moment to destroy anything, right? You go anywhere. You could destroy the all points. You could destroy, and if it crashed down in Azir, that would be crazy. Take out the Sigmar Obelum, and all of a sudden you've got no more Reforging Stormcast.
Nice. All right. Tom, any interesting called shot or narrative move you think it would be great for them to make? Any likelihood?
Yeah, like again, I think that I feel pretty confident about my call on Nagash and the Ascendants of Destruction. I feel like those are the trajectory. I don't know how Slaanesh fits into that. I think that that's what I'm going to go with. I'm just going to I'll just say this. I'm really hopeful for the trajectory we're on story-wise. I really am. And I look forward to where they go with it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. I like all of these elements that you guys have laid out. If there was going to be sort of, as we bring the Soul Wars to an end, the key is all of these things are about resources, right? All of these battles so far have been about resources. So the first one was about the realm gates, right? Those were the most important resource at the time. The next phase was the souls. They were the most important elements because everybody needed the souls to build their forces to go to war, right? And that's now largely been done. So the question is, what's the next resource that's so valuable? There is a really simple answer here.
Oh,
okay?
I got one.
Okay, go ahead. I'll wait. I'll hold. I'll keep my powder dry.
Faith, loyalty, especially with Shyish being able to generate gods based on the faith of mortal believers.
Yep.
Faith could easily be the next battlefield.
Exactly. Yeah, you literally pulled it right out. That's what I was going to say. Yes, the faith wars, right, or the wars of faith, right? In belief, where actually what's valuable now is no longer the dead, but the living, right, or those who call worship to some god. Like Nagash obviously makes believers by just killing them, but like for the most part, like that's a pretty easy. He's got a great method of sort of inducting people into his faith. But like I was thinking about this actually playing Skig is sort of the nature of faith and how powerful it is in the mortal realms, right? And once Slaanesh is free and there's not this big pinata of souls you can just punch forever, right? And the Stormcast and Nagash have kind of divided their sides and like, okay, your plan's done. It did what it did, and now you've got what you've got. And your reforging is flawed, but it's working however it's working. And like that line has been drawn. Now there's just lots of people, right? And Chaos has been fighting a hearts and minds game forever. That's been their battle, right? They're always on about this. And so what now the rest of the gods get into is the same thing. Into the recruitment, where you start to see them like trying to pull for the faith of the living. Yeah, the War of Faith. And I think that would be a super cool turn for what to go into next. That really gets to the heart of the mortal realms and the power that like the belief has, especially when entwined with the magic of the various realms. So just that's my thought. That's my crazy thought for what we could spin into next.
I think it's great. I agree.
I'm glad you got to the same place. Simpatico, my friend, simpatico. All right. Very good. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I know this was a very different show, but hopefully very fun. I hope everybody enjoyed all this talk of narrative. If you did like it, give it a like. It's as easy as moving your mouse from like here on your screen over to here and clicking a little button. It's just that easy. See, it's that. You can just do that right there. So please do give it a like. It helps other people find the show, and I really appreciate it. We all really appreciate it. Paul, thank you so much for being on the show, buddy. It was great to have you.
Awesome being here. Thank you.
Miss you like crazy that I didn't get to see in person all the times I'd normally see you this year. But fingers crossed 2021 will be the year where everything gets back to some kind of normal and we'll be back to our tournament. So I hope to see you then.
Exactly.
For all of you out there, thank you so much for watching. I very, very much appreciate it. Come join us next week for the 5th anniversary of AOS special. That's going to be very exciting. But as always, I thank you very much for watching this one. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.